Hello friends, welcome back to Cosmopolitan Cornbread. My name is Constance, and today I am bringing you into the kitchen to do some canning. I'm making some apple butter. Specifically, I'm making a caramel apple butter. Now I got some apples recently from Azure Standard, and when I shared about getting those apples, someone had asked me if these apples were coated with anything. And to be honest, I kind of assumed buying apples from Azure Standard that they wouldn't be coated with anything. There isn't any information on the item pages. I had checked in the descriptions. But when I pulled out the Gala apples, they felt like normal apples right from the orchard. There didn't feel like there was anything on them. However, I will tell you I am fairly certain that these Granny Smiths that you see me working on do have some sort of coating. I believe it is likely paraffin wax, but I've reached out to Azure Standard to see if I could find out, and I will let y'all know what they say. Now, if you live somewhere in northwest Arkansas and you know of any apple orchards, I would love to find out about them. I haven't lived in Arkansas that long, and I just haven't seen any orchards or you-pick places or things like that around. So if there's any Arkansans here who can help me out, I would love for you to share that information with me. So to make this caramel apple butter, I'm peeling, coring, and chopping up 8 pounds of the Granny Smith apples. Now, of course, you can use whatever apple you prefer to use, but I love the tartness and tanginess of Granny Smith apples. So I've got all my chopped up apples in my big non-reactive pot here, and I'm adding in 4 cups of water. You could also use apple juice if you want to, but water does the trick just fine. And I'm putting a cover on there to help hold in the heat to bring the apples up to a boil. Then I'll reduce the heat and simmer them until they're very tender and you can mash them with the back of a spoon. Now at this point you can use a blender or a food processor. I've got this handy immersion blender, and I'm just going to puree the apples. Now I don't do a perfect job. I'm not too worried about that because I do like there to be chunky little bits of apple in my apple butter. But if you like yours to be completely smooth, then by all means, puree it completely. Now to the pureed apples, I'm adding in 2 cups of granulated sugar, and 1½ cup of brown sugar. Next, I'm going to add in some seasonings. I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, which is also 4 teaspoons if you want to measure it that way. I'm adding in 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and then I'm just going to stir this all together And if I see any big chunks of apple that I missed, I'll just go ahead and mash those up because they're really easy to see once I've added in all the spices. So now I'm just going to cook the apple mixture on low, and as it gets hot it's going to bubble and splatter. So I'll put a lid on top, but I'll leave it cracked so all the moisture can escape. You're going to cook this until it's cooked down and thickened up into a nice, hearty, rich apple butter. Now, if you don't want to cook this on the stove, you could also bake it in your oven, pour it into a shallow baking pan, and bake it at 350 and just stir it every 20 minutes or so until it's thickened up. Or you can throw it in a slow cooker with the lid cracked and let it cook on low all day or overnight until it's nice and thick. And I've got 2 big pots of apples going because I've got 2 different types of apple butter that I'm making. But I'll share the other recipe another day. Now I've always got a couple spoons stuck in my freezer just so that I can test when I'm making jellies or jams or apple butter like this. Just take a little dollop of the apple butter and plop it onto that cold spoon, and you'll see that the apple butter is nice and thick. You don't have liquid pooling around it coming out of the apple butter. It's nice and thick and it stays mounted there on the spoon. So it's ready to can. So I have my prepared jars that have been inspected and washed and all of that. Now this recipe usually makes somewhere between 5 and 6 pints of apple butter depending upon how much liquid you cook down and other factors, and we'll begin jarring this up in just a moment. The canner that I'm using here is a steam canner. It is for high acid foods, just like apple butters and jellies and things like that. Anything that you can process in a hot water bath canner, you can process in this steam canner, and the processing time is going to be the same. I'm ladling the hot caramel apple butter into my hot jars, and I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch of headspace, which is the distance between the top of the apple butter to the top of the jar. I'm using my little chopstick as a bubble wand to get any bubbles out, and adding a little bit more to bring it up to a 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to take my damp rag and dip it in the white vinegar, and I'm going to wipe the rim of my jar very, very well. And I always use a different spot on my cloth for each jar. I take a hot lid, put it on the jar with a ring, and into the canner. And I'm going to do this process with all of the apple butter. So this round of caramel apple butter ended up giving me 5 pints, but I did do one of those pints in half-pint jars. I like to have a mix of small and full-size jars. The steam canner I use has a gauge in the handle that lets you know when it's up to temperature for your elevation. The processing time, whether it's in the steam canner or the hot water bath canner, is 15 minutes. So after my jars have been processing, I turn off the heat, let them rest for a few minutes there with the lid on, and right after I take the lid off the canner, some of the jar lids start popping as they seal. I'm just going to transfer all of the jars over to my lined counter in a draft-free location, and I'll let them cool overnight. So the next morning I come into the kitchen and I get ready for another day of canning. I've still got lots of apples to can, and as I'm recording this, I've still got even more apples to go through. But on this particular day, I was going to can the other version of the apple butter that I allowed to cook overnight in the slow cooker there with the lid propped open. And I also worked on another apple recipe on this particular day, which I'll share in a different video. So now I'm taking off the rings, I'm checking all the lids to make sure they're all sealed, and they usually are. If one isn't, I'll stick it in the fridge to use it right away. I'm washing all my jars with warm soapy water, rinsing them off. And then when they're all clean, I'll dry them off very well, and I'll label each jar. And that is it. You can get a printable version of this apple butter recipe on my website, cosmopolitancornbread.com. I'll put a link to it in the video description down below. So thanks for spending time with me here today at the homestead. My name is Constance from Cosmopolitan Cornbread. God bless, and I'll talk to y'all next time.